All right, now that we've got some color into our game, a little more visual appearance, let's turn our attention to the player, which I think is going to deserve a little bit of special treatment here. So rather than do it here, I'm going to go back to that player scene. So I'm just editing and changing the original player scene. That way, when I put this in multiple levels, then we can have it all over the place and won't be just unique to level one. Um, Now, the player, we're going to do something a little bit different, but it starts off the same way here. I want to change the appearance of the mesh, so I'm going to go click over on that mesh instance and then click on the mesh here, and then we've got this material. So I am going to make a new standard material just as I did previously. The difference being here is I am going to instead of with the albedo, instead of putting a color on here, you'll notice there's also what's called a texture slot. And the texture is generally some kind of file or a picture that gets applied or wrapped around or adds to a standard color or computer generated material. So we can layer on different things, and this is how we create some really cool looking things. In this case, I could add the color like I did previously, but in this case, I'm going to just throw on a texture. And textures we're going to find often on the internet, or you can draw them or design them, do them in Photoshop or something. In this case, I'm going to start off really simple, and I'm just going to cheat actually and use Godot gives us a little robot Godot head. So I'm just going to use that picture. There's an icon.svg file here. And all I need to do is just drag it over all the way into the texture slot here to say which texture I'm going to use. Now, in general, straight flat pictures are not going to look great because you're taking a flat picture and you're wrapping it around a sphere, but we'll come up with something a little bit better later on. But I just want you to see what's happened here. So it's grabbed that texture and you can see it's wrapped it around the sphere here. It kind of stretches it out and gives you some weird, lines there, but it's kind of cool. We've got a picture now moving around, and if we were to play our game, just quickly bring it back, you'll see that we've got the Godot head here. Now I'm looking at it from the back side, so it doesn't look very impressive, but you can maybe just make out its face here. If I had the camera on the other side, we'd see that a little bit better. Uh, but now you can add something a little more interesting to your game, to your player. Now, just getting back into that material again, let's go check out the texture. There's the texture here that I did. Notice you can also add a color um, to that albedo. So it's going to layer the two on top of each other. So we've got both a color and a texture there, and there's nothing wrong with that. Um, to create a little more visual interest, if you want to get the exact look that you're going for, I'm just going to reset that. I'm happy with the color here. So before we add something a little more interesting and look at some of these other settings here, let's go back into the code because I'm not particularly happy looking at the back end of the Godot head here. So because this has a face and this is a marble game we're making, I want it to behave a little bit more like a marble would. So as this player moves, it's not going to slide around, it's going to roll. And now that if this was just a plain color, you wouldn't really see that rolling. But now that I have a picture here, I'll actually get to see the rolling happen. So to make that rolling, let's go have a look at the player script and get in here because right now we've got just this standard moving, the forward, backward, up and down. We're sliding along here, but I would like to add a roll when I do this as well. So let's figure out how we can make that happen. So when I press the up arrow, I'm going to jump into the player mode here. This is kind of how I'm looking at things in my game. And when I press the up arrow, I'm going this way. When I press the down arrow, I'm going this way. So if I want to make this look like it's rolling, what I need to do is actually to kind of spin this character around, as you see here. Undo that. Um, but you do have to be wary because I don't want it to necessarily spin the whole player. Because notice as I spin the player, uh, you may remember I decided to put a cube collision shape here. So I'm going to get this kind of thump, thump, thump because it's not a nice, smooth, round thing. So in fact, I don't need the whole player to spin. All I need to do is give the appearance that it's spinning. So I want to rotate this mesh around here like that. If I think about moving it on a forward direction like so. So I'm going to rotate, oops, I'm going to rotate around this x-axis. Keep that in mind there. Even though I'm moving in the z, I'm going to rotate this player around the x-axis. So let's have a little look-see at how to do that. When I press up, let's give this a try. And I'm going to not just move forward, but I want to spin the mesh. And here we've changed the velocity of the player, which is great, but a really cool thing about this, this parent-child structure, remember these are child nodes of the player, is that I can access or change any of the properties of a child simply by putting the name of a child. Notice the script is on player, so I have direct access to all of its children. And I do that with the $, and you'll see that $sign pops up and I start to say mesh instance 3D. There it is right there. So I'm going to say mesh instance.3D and dot rotate around the X we talked about here. So I've got a function called rotate, which will actually do that rotation for me, and I'm going to rotate the child here. Now, in the parentheses, I need to say how much I'm going to rotate. So let's try that 5 we had started with. I'm just getting here. Notice it says it's an angle. So okay, let me think 5 degrees maybe. Let's try that out and play my, go back to my level, play my game. See what happens. Now it's not going to do anything on the back side here, but when I go forward, whoa, there we go. And wow, that is really spinning. So it's a little bit more than I had anticipated. 5 degrees, this seems really, really fast and doesn't really match up on the speed. So I guess I could reduce that, but also I want to figure out why it's going so crazy fast. And then I'll need to add it to some of the other ones here as well. So when we say 5, and this is an angle, that does line up, but it's a lot faster than 5 degrees. And the reason for this is that most computer programs, and when we get into math and rotation in computer programs, they don't actually use degrees. When the measurement and an angle is not degrees, it's something called radians. And if you're in grade 12 math, you'll have started to explore radians, but until then, you don't know what radians are, and degrees just make much more sense. So we're not going to worry about the math behind it. Just know that we actually measure angles in computing in a slightly different way than degrees quite often. And fortunately, you don't have to know the math because we have a function that's called deg2rad. So this will take a certain number of degrees and convert it to the radians for us. Turns out 5 radians is actually a lot of spin. So I want 5 degrees. I don't know what it is in radians. Luckily, I don't have to care about that. I can just say in here, deg to rad, and you'll notice there's also a rad to deg, or radians to degrees function here. And I would like to say that's going to be 5. And let's test that out to see if it's a little bit more of a reasonable speed to rotate around and make it look a little more realistic. Let's bring it back so I can see it nicely. And oh, I've gone in the opposite direction. So that's an important thing to think about. Looks like I'm rotating the wrong way, but it actually looks not too bad. So fortunately, I can just say negative deg2rad, and that will rotate it the opposite direction. Let's see if we get a realistic looking thing. Could be a little bit faster, I think. Or I need to slow my movement down because it looks like I'm sliding along like a bowling ball, kind of. And here's where we would want to bring in that idea of that constant again. Remember, I'm starting to put numbers down here, which means that it's going to be a pain to update later on and is not good programming habits. So what I want to do is, and in fact, you know what? I could clean all of this up here and I could make a new constant. So I'm going to make a constant and I will call it roll speed. And it's going to equal, let's try, we're moving 7, so let's try the 7 degrees, see if that works. But nicely, I can also throw the deg2rad feature in here and say it's going to be, the roll speed is going to be 7 degrees in radians. So down here, all I have to do is now say negative roll speed. So I'm going to rotate at negative roll speed, and now I can steal that whole line there, and I'm going to add it to the down as well and see. In this case, of course, it'll be positive roll speed. And for the left and right, I'm going to want to do that as well, but let's double check. For left and right, I'm going to be moving this way, which means I'm going to be spinning in this direction. So I'm going to be rotating around the Z axis. Think of that Z axis as being like a skewer that goes through the player and is going to rotate in that direction. So same idea with the left and the right, and I don't actually know which way I'm going to spin. I'm going to guess that left is negative, and remember we're rotating around the Z this time, and that right is positive. So I'll make that positive and rotate around the Z. If it's the wrong way around, I just have to quickly change those codes there. And let's see if that makes it look a lot better. Oh yeah, rolling pretty good. Oh, it is backwards, so I notice I'm spinning the wrong direction, but I can quickly change that. What I want to look at is the speed about right? Looks pretty good actually. So play around with your numbers to see if you get a feeling that you like. Again, I need to make this one positive and this one negative so that now we've got a realistic looking character that moves around. We can see it as it rolls, which is kind of cool and actually feels like I've got control of this, and it's that a marble that's moving around what will soon hopefully be a little maze. All right. Now, we talked about maybe a better way of getting some nice graphics on here because the Godot head's okay, but it looks a little stretched out and is not as detailed as I want. And I want to be able to solve some of these weird problems of taking a flat object and wrapping it around a sphere. But let's save that for the next video. We'll look at some resources where you could get some excellent graphics so that our game is going to look way, way better.